Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is comedian, actor, writer, and game designer Ben McKenzie. For nearly 20 years, he's been doing a little bit of everything. Sketch, improv, stand-up, musicals, storytelling, theater, lectures, podcasts, and even late-night museum tours. What I like most about him is he marries comedy and science, such as his time travel comedy audio show, Night Terrace. He's also designed and hosted dozens of live games, such as Small Time Criminals and a city-wide romp, Where in Melbourne is Carmen or Diego. He currently hosts the Terry Pratchett book club podcast, Pratt Chat. Welcome, Ben.
It's a pleasure to be here. Hello.
Hello. Ben, if you weren't working as a comedian, an actor, a writer, or game designer, what would you be doing?
Probably I'd be doing one of the things I actually do for a job. So like a lot of freelance arts people, I have lots of different jobs. But one of the things I've been doing more so in the last few years is doing a lot of workshops with children. A lot of it is creative writing based, but I also do workshops with teenage kids about self-esteem and stuff like that. And I really enjoy it. And I don't know that it's ever a thing that I saw myself doing, but I really love it. And I think even if I wasn't doing all of the comedy stuff, I would probably still be working with kids in some way. I think I probably would have found my way there one way or another.
So that pays the bills.
Yeah, that's what I mostly do to pay the bills, and writing. Last year I got my first proper video game writing gig, which was really exciting. That was great. Like, I was paying the bills working on video games after a lot of time designing other kinds of games. And I'm hoping more writing also will pay the bills. But mostly writing and working with kids in these workshops, yeah.
What does it mean to write for a video game?
Well, in my case, sometimes, depending on the size of the project, it might be broken up into a few different roles. I'm working with a fairly small company called Tin Man Games. They're here in Melbourne. They're great, but it's a fairly small team. So in terms of dedicated writers, it was pretty much just me for most of the project.
Okay.
And that meant I also filled in what might be a separate role on some larger projects, like narrative design. So as well as writing the dialogue for the script, I'm also writing, or I'm also sort of storyboarding it in a sense, like not visually, but in terms of plotting out what is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a video game, so it's a branching narrative. It's not a single story that goes from A to B to C to D and then it's over. It's got different directions it can go in. You have to think about different conditions that the story might be in at any point. So there's a lot of that kind of design. And, I also got to do things like design the personalities of the characters, like what were their names going to be, who are they going to meet, what are their backstories, like all that kind of stuff. It was great, and it was something I felt very prepared for, having played and designed a lot of other kinds of games. So, yeah, it was really exciting.
I want to talk about this for a little while, because this sounds fascinating to me. So, how do you storyboard a branching narrative?
It's it looks kind of like an old school flowchart when I do it. I mean, there's lots of different ways to do it, and I have some friends who are really they teach this stuff and they're amazing at it. One of my jobs is at a creative writing center for children. This is one of the workshops I do with kids, and one of the best workshops we do there at 100 Story Building is about choose your own adventure style stories, and it's very similar to that. So you start with one beginning. Usually, I mean, sometimes games can have more than one beginning depending on what choices you get when you start, but then you take it in different directions. So in a normal storyboard, if you've ever seen pictures of like a storyboard or an animatic from like a DVD special features or something like that, it's like a series of static or slightly animated sketches saying, well, we want this scene to look like this scene to look like this, and they're based on the script, so they sort of refer to what scenes they are in the script and what's happening. And in a game, if you're going to do a branching narrative, the simplest version is like a choose your own adventure, is you get to a certain point and there's maybe 2 or 3 places where it could go next.
Door number A, B, or C.
Exactly. Yeah. In this game...
Number A, B, or C.
Hey, it's appropriate. You can use whatever numbering scheme you want. This game is like a lot of video games in that it's not quite that straightforward, but it's pretty close. I can't say too much about it because it still hasn't been officially announced at the time of recording. I'm excited because it's finally going to be announced, and I'm going to be in Boston in April to show it off at PAX East for the company, which is going to be great. But it's very difficult not to talk about things when you've been working on it for a year. But like a lot of video games, this one's a bit more complicated than that. And so there are multiple points where you can decide to go in different sections. You can play different parts of the game in different orders, as well as sort of the big branches where you sort of connect these boxes where you draw a scene and say, well, this is what's going to happen. You also need to just make a few notes about, well, if they come to place A first, that's great, and then they go to place B, and that means they already know these things. But if they go to place B first and then they go to place A, well, you've got to go, well, they haven't seen these things yet, but they've seen these other things first. So you kind of need to fiddle that.
There's a lot of if-then statements.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's very simple, like Boolean logic for the most part. That's what it boils down to. I mean, I studied a little computer programming when I was in high school and in university, and basically all computer programming boils down to very simple if-then statements if you take it far enough.
Who's Boolean?
Boolean variables are named after George Boole. I had a teacher in year 8 in high school who's very pleased that I remembered that, if he's listening, or year 9. Anyway, George Boole invented this idea of logical algebra. You know, normally algebra is like, you know, this letter means this number, but he invented logical algebra, which is just all of the variables are true or false.
Yes.
And then there are operators for them, which are basically...
It's like ands and ors and
stuff. Or, and that gets further boiled down in computer science to only 2 or 3 options, because you can build all the other ones out of those.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, or, but there has to be something else.
Oh, right? There's and, or, not, nor. Basic building blocks are and not. You kind of, true is kind of equivalent to equals, or is. You might say variable A, and you don't need to say is true, but you can if you want to longhand it, then do this.
I remember coming across this stuff like with searching library databases and stuff like that. Right?
One of my first jobs in university was teaching these free workshops to students about how to use the internet. And this is like in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. So I would be teaching them how to use 3 different search engines, because we didn't know that there would end up only being one that most people would use.
I always liked Alta Vista.
Yeah.
I felt like that was a pretty strong search engine.
Well, see, I remember, the weirdest part is I remember at the time I was teaching them about, there's 2 kinds of search engines. You know, there's like an index and there's like a web crawler. And there were other terms for these. But basically one was hand categorized by humans, and that's like something like old school Yahoo was like this.
Yeah. Ask Jeeves or something like that.
Yeah, well, actually, and basically they collected all these web page links, and then human beings would go, okay, this web page is an entertainment one. This one is about, because they didn't have sophisticated enough computers to do it automatically. And then you had other ones which you just searched for a word and it just told you what websites had that word. Or
right, because I remember people used to write that word like 97 times at the bottom of their page to help with the search, right?
Yeah, and they do all kinds of crazy stuff to get people to find their websites. I mean, I remember the first time I tried to use a website, there wasn't any search engines. Like, you just had to have the address of the web page that you wanted to visit. But I told them about those 2 different kinds, and then I told them that, and there's this new one that seems to be getting popular that's kind of a mix of both, which is Google. And so you can use that if you want, but if you don't know what specific site or specific thing you want, but you know the kind of thing you want, you can go to like Yahoo or whatever the other one was, or you want to ask a specific question, or you're just searching for something you don't really quite specific, you can use this one or that one, and Google kind of gives you results that are like a mix of the both, which it did at the time. These days, who knows? It's Google.
Yeah, that's right.
The algorithm is a mystery.
It's a black box. I have an idea I've been working on about editing in various different papers. You know, this idea of reordering and revising. There must be a lot of editing that's happening at different stages of a video game.
Oh, yeah. I love a good collaborative process. It's my favorite way to make art or anything, is with other people. This was really collaborative because I would be doing narrative design, character design, and story design, and that would go back and forth with the level designers. So I would say, okay, this, I'm going to pick an example that's not in the game because I'm not allowed to talk about it yet, but it's, I would say, like, okay, so this is going to happen on Mars with dinosaurs. Now I wish I was making that game. But it's going to happen on Mars with dinosaurs. There's in a big red crater, and there's like a crashed spaceship that's huge, and there's a busted open door, and that's where the dinosaurs came out, right? Okay. And most of the dinosaurs are T-Rexes, but the best one is a Stegosaurus, because that's my favorite dinosaur.
I saw that in your bio.
I'd put that in there. And the characters got to run away from them, and they'd be like, okay, great. And then they come back to me and go, all right, so look, it turns out in the way that we're doing the game, we can't make a deep enough crater, because you have to look at it in 360 degrees and the walls would have to all be done. It's too much for our budget and our time. how about instead of making it in a crater, we do it like just a flat surface and there's like mountains in the background. We can do that. And I'll be like, okay, that's fine.
Right.
I'll rewrite it a bit. They might come to me and say, well, there's a problem. We can't really have more than 6 dinosaurs. And you kind of have asked for like 20. And I'm like, all right, let me see what I can do. And I'll solve that problem. Or they might go, the dinosaurs can't be bigger than this because of some limitations of whatever. And it sounds like they're always coming back to me with problems, but sometimes
I prefer to call them constraints.
Constraints, yeah, that's true.
Constraints, yeah.
And constraints make for better art, I think. But often they would also come back to me and say, well, look, we think maybe it would be better if we do it like this. And people that I'm working with are very experienced video game makers. They know what they're doing. And they never came to me with an idea where I didn't go, oh yeah, this is great.
Sure.
Okay, let's do that. They never asked me to cut or take out anything that I really loved. Oh, well, no, that's probably not quite true, but it's important to be able to recognize, sometimes you've got to let a few things go. Mm-hmm. And it will make the final thing better. And also done. Like, that's the other thing.
You gotta finish this thing.
Yeah, I think one of the benefits of doing something raw, and this is one of the things I love about improvisation, is it's done.
Mm-hmm.
It's out there. You do it the first time, and that's what the audience gets. And there's that understanding in an improvised performance, whether it's music or, like jazz or some other sort of improv music, or whether it's comedy or anything. There's an understanding from the audience that that's what's happening. People that they are watching are very skilled, but this is the first time they are doing the thing they're doing, and it will never be done again. And that's part of the thrill. And so you don't worry if it's a bit rough around the edges or it doesn't stand up to scrutiny when you think about it later. That doesn't matter because it's of the moment. But it's done and it's out there. Once you start doing something that needs to be edited and refined, you can get lost in that process. And I know I've had games mostly of my own. This is an area where I've stumbled on this block, where I have written like a draft of something, and then I have gone, oh, that's not ready, it's not quite right, and then I'll edit it again, and oh, no, it's still not ready, it's not quite right. And because I want it to be perfect, and I'm going to keep revising it until it is, it never gets to be perfect because nothing ever is, and it never gets to a finished stage where it's out.
Yeah, I've heard people use this term about perfect is the enemy of good.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I believe that for sure.
Yeah, I do agree with you. Improv is, the audience is forgiving.
I'd say receptive.
Receptive, fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, they are also forgiving, that's true.
Also, it's moving. I mean, look, they're not going to forgive bad upon bad scenes, but as you said, you stumble a little bit.
Yeah, that's fine.
How late in the video game process is cutting happening?
Like cutting things out?
Yeah, because I've noticed in my research, there's a lot of complaints. Games are too long, people never finish, right? These finishing rates are very low.
Yeah.
And so on. And so they seem to be, I use this term, undercut. Folks haven't trimmed enough of the fat. What's your thoughts on that?
There's been some interesting writing about this recently. A video game designer I know, Morgan Jaffett, wrote a long piece about this. But the audiences tend to complain a lot about video games no matter what you do. That's kind of there's a core. It's not the whole audience, but there's a certain segment of that audience, and this is true in other sort of nerd circles as well. Is where there's this sort of group who consider themselves the arbiters of what is good and bad in video games, and there's other people who feel that way about other things like science fiction and comics and stuff. And and they're, let's be honest, they're mostly younger white dudes, right? They become gatekeepers of those areas. Like they want to be seen as the people who are the most knowledgeable and the best at those things. And so they complain a lot because that's their way of controlling what's happening. Is to say, that's wrong, that's bad, that's wrong. And they generally actually would not be the people complaining that the games are too long. I think they would probably complain if they were too short.
Oh, is that right?
But I understand that. I mean, I'm replaying Skyrim at the moment, the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, which is one of those massive games with this huge, very detailed world that you can explore all over the place, and you can play it for literally hundreds of hours and not run out of things to do.
Is that why you're replaying it? Because there's stuff you haven't seen?
Yeah, well, I stopped playing it, and then a newer version came out, and I resisted getting the sort of remastered version with the prettier graphics for a long time, because you couldn't transfer your save game from the old one to the new one on the console, which is where I'm playing it on the Xbox. And
it's called planned obsolescence.
It does.
Marketing.
Well, it's just, what? Having worked in the industry now, I get it, because like every extra thing you have to do is extra work, and it's like they would have had to program in. They would have had to figure out, okay, well, we've revised the whole way the save system works to make it more efficient and so that it can store more information. It's not quite compatible with the old one. We didn't think that would really be a problem. we can write a tool on PC to export it, because we just give that as a job to do to someone. It's separate, it doesn't have to be in the game, it won't screw anything up. But on console, you'd have to build it into one game or the other. And so they didn't do it. And I think that's fine. I think most people don't care. But I resisted it because I was like, oh, well, I never really finished that game. And I kind of would like to finish it with that character. And then it went on sale. Like, it had been out for a couple of years and it was really cheap. And I was like, I'll just buy it. And I actually partly bought it for my housemate because he had expressed a desire to play it again. And then he moved out. So I thought, well, I better play it. Okay. And I love it. You know, it's huge. We kind of have gone the opposite way. I mean, this game that I've been working on is a virtual reality game, which is one of the few things I'm allowed to say about it at this stage. But they tend to be very short by comparison to other games.
Just because of the technology and the...
Yeah, well, you can't spend too long in VR. Like, it's really... You know, I think even as the technology gets better, I think until there's like some sort of Black Mirror style implant that goes into your brain, it'll never be good enough that your brain won't know it's not real. On some level, and so it's difficult and tiring to play for too long.
I see.
For some people, it's very tiring for even very short periods of time. There's some really interesting research that suggested that particularly the earlier VR technologies were designed with the usual kind of bias of the video game and entertainment industry, which is that they just thought about the audience as being men, which is incorrect. Like nearly 50% of people who play video games are women, but they just tested it on dudes, and there was some weird thing where there was some sort of thing that was more likely for women to experience that made particularly the earlier VR headsets very uncomfortable for them.
Oh, interesting.
Which I think they've done work to address now. I hope. I certainly don't hear about it as much, but there's just the technology is still fairly new.
Yeah, I think so.
I think it's a really interesting time for VR too, because we just don't know at this stage if it's going to stick around and become something great and everybody's going to want it, or if it's going to be like 3D TVs, and that everybody's going to think it's going to be great for a few years, and then people are going to go, nah, it's not that great, we're not that interested. And I think right now we just don't know which way it's going to go. I certainly think it's going to last a few more years. I think there's still a lot more interesting things that can be done in VR.
And a lot of sunk costs, too.
Yeah, that's true.
I want to get back to this idea of collaboration. So you talked about how you prefer that, and you feel that good art comes from collaboration. So that flies in the face of the kind of artistic genius that kind of floats around out there, which I think is largely a myth. I think even the people who are sort of singular geniuses, are influenced greatly by others. Like, you think about like French Impressionist artists, like all those guys were like hanging out in the same cafes and stuff like that, right? Like it wasn't like they were just sitting alone figuring this stuff out.
I guess the word they might have used the word like collegiate or something. Like they weren't necessarily working on the same art together, but they were mingling and they were exchanging ideas and tips and tricks and
seeing each other's work and being influenced by it and so on. This is just a total random story, but I really like it because you can, if you know the artist, you can see how it's connected. 70s mostly band, Sly and the Family Stone.
Oh yeah.
Fantastic funk rock band, super cutting edge, like one of the first mixed race bands and mixed gender, different people sing and their music is fantastic.
I haven't listened to enough, but I've listened to enough to know that
it's incredible.
Amazing. Yeah.
So there's a story about Stevie Wonder going to one of their concerts and just being like blown away by this band. So much so that he wrote Superstition, one of his biggest hits, which is a much funkier Stevie Wonder song, and probably one of his, I think, best songs.
It's a brilliant song.
It's a brilliant song, and it's a toned down version of Sly and the Family Stone, right? It's fun because if you know Stevie Wonder, you hear his, love ballads, and then all of a sudden you get this super funky song that's you're like, that's so different for him.
Yeah. I love that song.
I think those things are happening. But tell me a little bit more about how do you cultivate these collaborative relationships or collegial relationships and so on.
Well, I like to work in direct collaboration, which is where you have multiple people working on the same project, and I think it comes from one of my really earliest comedy experiences, actually, my love of it. One of the first comedy things I ever did was a comedy review at the University of Melbourne when I was a student there. And here, I can say here.
We are here.
We are here, it's true. So I've come back to this campus a surprising number of times for someone who didn't even graduate from their degree, you know? Like,
you're drinking their tea?
I know, I feel like I've gotten something out of it. You know, I had such a good time here. It has changed a lot since I was here. But back then, we had the comedy review, and I was in the comedy review in about 1999, and I worked with a great bunch of folks. We had a director and a script editor, and there were 6 of us in the cast, so there was 8 of us working together. And it was entirely collaborative. We would do improvisation during rehearsals to come up to like generate ideas, and then sort of whoever was the main instigator of a particular idea would be sent away to write the script. They'd come back, we'd try performing their script. The director, Scott Gooding, and the script editor, who's Rob Rourke, I almost forgot his name, that's terrible. I mean, look, it's nearly 20 years ago, so I should give myself a bit of slack.
Yeah.
They would sort of identify what that sketch was most lacking, and they would pick the person in the cast who was best at that thing and give it to them and say, do a rewrite.
Okay.
And that would happen, and then the script would come back, and if it was your script that had been sent with someone else to get that rewrite, it would come back, and it was like this magical process where this thing that you created is now better.
I mean, that assumes a bunch of things, right?
It does assume
competence on the rewriter. It assumes an ability to kill your darlings.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we had problems with that. I mean, you know, we were all very young comedians. Like, we were all 19 or 20 years old, maybe 21, I think, the oldest cast member. It was a great company to be in. Like, a few of us stayed in comedy. Not all of us, but like Yanni Ajislaw, who's now a big stand-up in the UK, and Lawrence Leung was in the cast for that, who's now, you know, has done lots of TV and still a great stand-up comedian as well. You know, we stuck with it, and I think there was an audition process to get in too.
Okay.
So it wasn't just like, you know, hey, we'll just pick 6 people and we'll go with it. Like, we had to be good performers, and I think we also had to, during the audition process, perform something we had written or improvised ourselves to show that we had some chops there. But I think by picking the skills that we each had that were our best, like if I had a problem with a couple of the scripts that I wrote used quite flowery, unnatural language.
Okay.
Which is something I don't have a problem with that anymore. But at the time, like, I remember there was one sketch where there were friends in a pub. Well, one of them was recounting a story, and it was about how they were playing pool, and he was going to like get 7-balled, and he was going to have to like run around the table with his pants around his ankles. And he said something like, you know, pants down and thrice around the table. And Scott said, no one would say thrice.
Right.
Nobody says that. It's not Dickensian England. So
I'd like to write whilst.
yeah.
Sometimes in emails.
Yeah.
Just
I love that kind of stuff, you know. But you've got to have a good excuse to use it if you're going to do it. And I think one of the things it taught me, you know, you've got to be very precise in your selection of language. You don't just pick words because you think they sound nice. They have to have a purpose and a meaning beyond just the meaning that they convey. They also have to convey, and this is like very true in theatre and in prose writing and everything. You must be very careful about, because you can say, and particularly in English, I'm sure it's true in other languages too, but in English we can say the same thing in about 100 different ways, and you want to
Australians also have even more words to choose from, I feel like.
Well, we turn ordinary words into other words. So like we just shorten them, lengthen them, make ones up. It's great.
You have more words to work with.
More words?
I believe that. Well, not more words, but you can use words in more ways.
Okay, yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
But people are very creative. I mean, I love this about online language. That has evolved separately to in-person language. And it's relatively recent, like the last 5-10 years, that language has started to get used in the real world. But when it started out, you know, like on IRC channels, like old school chat rooms, you would never say lol in real life.
Yes.
But that's where that stuff is much older than text messaging amongst teenagers. That's like from the 70s. But you would never say lol in person to another person.
You know, you're right about this. Like, I knew that this was happening when my 50-year-old plus finance professor next door neighbor writes BRB on a Post-it note during his office hours.
That's from IRC originally.
Is that right?
BRB, yeah. lol, ruffle, like rolling on the floor laughing.
Yes.
Like a lot of the ones that, people think, oh, it's the kids in their text speak. And every time I hear
What about SMH?
SMH is more recent. That's a newer one. I do love that.
We are living in judgier times.
Yeah. It's become very necessary in the modern world, I feel, the old SMH or SMDH, if you want to add extra emphasis.
I don't even know what that means.
The D is for damn.
Oh, okay.
Shake my damn head.
I see.
Love it. It's like one of my favorite ones to use is ZOMG, because I don't think anybody really knows what the Z is for. I used to think it meant zombies, because like OMG, oh my god. And it was like Zomg is like a slightly more playful but more intense version.
Okay.
And I used to think it was like zombies, oh my god, but I don't think that makes any sense. But it has a nice sound to it, Zomg. Like you can say it as a word. I love it. So I use that quite a bit.
I'm fine with using all those things. You know what I don't use very much? Emojis.
Oh, you're not a fan?
It's not that I'm not a fan. I just feel, I don't know, I just feel like sometimes like too much of a grown-up. Yet I see why they're useful.
Yeah.
I mean, I study emotions.
Yeah.
I study emotions, so I know the value of expressing emotions.
But is that the best way to express an emotion?
Via text message?
I mean, again, from IRC is where like the little emoticons that were made of text markers started.
And comma and a colon.
Yeah, colon and a parentheses for a little smiley face. Yeah. My favorite one's the winking smiley.
Yes, isn't it the colon?
That's a semicolon. And
semicolon, that's right. Semicolon.
A parenthesis. And I use that a lot. Got me into trouble a couple of times in the emails. But I still do that. I still do the old fashioned ones. But I like emojis, but I don't like them replacing, because they don't necessarily have a lot of nuance unless you are using them in a sophisticated way, and some people do. There's a great comedian, Laura Davis, who's based here in Melbourne. Wonderful stuff that she does, but she had a sort of side project which was a separate Twitter account where she would, I think she's still doing it, I don't know, but she'd tell stories using only emoji.
Okay.
And yeah, it was great.
Wow.
I love that account. I can't remember what it's called, but look it up. It's great. Yeah.
I'm sure I'll hate it.
You might. It's very clever though.
I'm sure it's and
funny.
Talk about constraints.
See, that's a constraint on storytelling. You can only use pictures from this limited set. Once you find out more about how they work and how anybody can add a new emoji, like you can apply to have one added.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, you can write up a proposal, go to the standards committee that runs it, and you present your case. But it has to go through like a fair few sort of pit stops along the way, and they don't want to put ones in that are too niche. Like they've got to have relatively broad use.
Okay.
I'm seriously have considered like trying to get Stegosaurus put in there, because there are now dinosaur ones. Okay. But there's only T-Rex and like a Brachiosaurus or some sort of it's a generic sauropod. Like you can't tell which one it is. But
he says dismissively.
Look, I am unabashedly still love dinosaurs. I don't think I ever stopped. And I never will. They're so great. But Stegosaurus is my favorite. So I want to get Stegosaurus in there, because I feel like it has a specific meaning because it's such a specific dinosaur, but also everybody knows what it is. So
wait, which one is the Stegosaurus?
Well, the Stegosaurus is the one. I wrote my last solo show. I wrote a poem about the Stegosaurus. That's how much I love Stegosaurus. But the Stegosaurus has a very distinctive silhouette, which is one of the reasons why it's my favorite. So it's got a very small head. It's got smaller front legs and bigger back legs. It's got the big plates on its back, the pentagonal plates. Yes. And then the thagomizer, to use the term that Gary Larson...
That's the thing on its tail.
Coined, is the spikes on its tail.
Okay.
Yeah, I love them.
I had one of those. I had a plastic one of those when I was a kid.
I actually... You know how some people collect things, and like you might have that aunt who's got like a little cabinet full of like various different kinds of pig statue.
I think we call them tchotchkes.
Tchotchkes,
bric-a-brac.
Or knickknacks.
Knickknacks, yes.
Yeah. I accidentally started a collection of Stegosauruses. It's not very big, but it happened because I just happened to tell my partner at the time, this is many years ago now, like 10 years ago, how much I loved them. And she found a tiny little metal one somewhere. I don't even remember where she found it. And she stole it and gave it to me.
Okay.
And it was a beautiful model one. And then that kind of kicked it off. And then a few other people gave me them. And then I would go to places, and if I was in a museum and they had like an interesting one, I'd buy it. And I think I don't have that many. Like I'd be lucky. It's like 15 or 20.
I see.
Like it's not a massive collection. And I've kind of stopped adding to it now. And another partner who, she said it was a joke birthday present wouldn't ever get me another joke one. I mean, we didn't end up being together for more than a year, so it wasn't a problem. But she bought me one of those little, like you get those baby on board signs for the car.
Yes, uh-huh.
It was like that, except it was blue, and it just had a picture of some Stegosauruses, and it said Stegosaurus Sanctuary. And she said, it's just a joke present. I was like, no, this is the best. And I stuck it on the door of my room. And I had it there for years. I loved that sign. It was great.
Nice. That's a good joke gift that backfires. Backfires in a good way.
Yeah.
God, there's so many things I want to talk to you about. So, what are you best at?
See, this is...
you do lots of things. You do a lot of things.
I do, yeah.
Which is why I wanted you on here. I don't want just stand-ups.
Yeah.
I want people who have...
Well, it's much easier for me to answer the question, what am I worst at?
Okay, let's...
and I think in comedy terms, it's probably stand-up. Like, I've done a fair bit, but I feel like the stand-up that I've done... I'm in awe of people who are good at stand-up. I think stand-up is much more difficult than a lot of people give it credit for.
I agree with you.
And being a good stand-up who can write jokes that appeal to... Like, if you're a really famous stand-up, like if you're, up in the ranks of, like... Even people that I don't necessarily like the work of, not that that's necessarily the people I'm about to mention. I hate to say.
The people you like and don't like.
Yeah. But they're huge, like... Now I'm afraid of what I'm going to say in case people think I don't like them. Anyway, people who have massive audiences.
Yes.
And some of those people, I like their work. Some of them I'm like, I could really take or leave this stuff. It's not my cup of tea. Comedy is intensely personal. Like, I think out of all of the art forms, comedy is one of them, not the most subjective, but it's like, it's the most fickle in terms of whether you like it or not.
Yeah, it's very hard to make. It's easy to make. I think it's easy to make art that sort of broadly accomplishes its goal to put people in awe, make them see something beautiful, make them cry, make them...
A lot of those things are
make
quite
them
universal.
happy, but it's hard to make a broad group of people laugh.
Yeah, and that's such a skill, and I look at someone like Justin Hamilton who does that with a massive audience, and I'm like, the guy's a genius.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I am not that good at that. Like, I'm not good at it. I've written a few things that I think work well, but I write better for... What's
your best kind of best joke? Your best stand-up joke?
The best one I always come back to, and it's not a short one because I'm not good at short jokes. And this is the one that it's a dinosaur joke.
Okay.
So I was like, I think...
Of course it is.
Everybody loves dinosaurs when they're 10 years old, right? It's like a little switch flicks on in your brain. You love dinosaurs. And if you think about it, dinosaurs are to 10-year-olds what attractive people are to 15-year-olds.
Okay.
Because, you're thinking about them all the time. You probably covered your walls in pictures of them.
Uh-huh.
You'd really like to touch one, but you're kind of afraid of what might happen if you did. And you have these dreams where you're like riding around on their back and kissing them on the... Oh, wait, hang on. Now I'm getting them mixed up. That's probably the favorite actual straight joke that I've ever written in terms of one you can deliver as stand-up. And that was one that's like from one of my earliest shows. Yeah. I don't think I've ever written a better joke. I mean, I've said things off the cuff, and this was actually the last solo show I did. I recorded it most nights. Okay. And I'm sure a lot of comedians do this, but I hadn't really done it before. And because it evolves, it changes. Most people don't script a comedy show. Mm-hmm. I used to because my background was theatre, so I was used to learning a script and doing it the same every night. And, obviously there's a bit of variance there, but
sure.
That's what I was used to. So if I was doing an hour-long comedy show, I'd workshop it, I'd come up with it. The first solo show I did, I worked with a director, which is something that I don't think enough comedians do. Like, I think more of them do now, and I think it's
is
really
that right?
important.
I've never heard of that.
It's still not a thing that most comedians do, but it's more popular now, and I think it's...
This is you liking collaboration.
Well, yeah, I feel like the outside eye can only make your work better. Like, if the only person who ever says yes or no to a work is the one person, you only ever have one idea of whether it's good or not. And the more ideas, particularly, it's got to be someone that you trust.
Sure.
Someone who has a similar but not identical sensibility to you. Because if they're too different to you, you're going to pull the work in different directions. It's going to end up somewhere where it doesn't quite fit. But some of the best shows I've seen are definitely... worked with a director, and conversely I've seen some shows that I thought were good, but I also was like, you didn't have a director because I would tell you to not, and it's something I've got an interest in doing. I'd love to direct more comedy. I've only directed a little, but I think sometimes you just need someone to say, okay, this is great, but that little bit that you did there, don't do that. It totally undercuts what you did for the 5 minutes before. And this bit that you did over here, like that callback comes 5 minutes too soon. Like the audience is expecting it still. Give it another, move it to this bit. And it's just like structural stuff like that that's very difficult to do on your own. And that's editing, right? Yeah. And I think, all comedians edit, even stand-up.
Sure. Oh, yeah, of course.
But they're doing it in their head. And some of them are doing it without thinking of it as a formal process. Most people probably don't think of it as a formal process. You just do it each night and you try something a little different, or you just do something a little differently because you remember the jokes in a different order. Mm-hmm. That's very common.
And happens all the time. Works better or worse.
And you go, it works better when this one was after that one, or 5 minutes later. And I love all that stuff, all the mechanics of how it works. And working with someone else means it gives you someone to talk to about that.
Mm-hmm. Versus, because I know comedians are always doing this. They're just talking to their mates after the show.
Yeah.
Over beers.
Yeah.
And getting kind of informal
feedback. And
I like it when you do this, or have you thought about, punch-ups and so on.
And I think I like the director relationship because it does two things for me, particularly because I came from a theatre background, so I was used to having technical discussions about that, like just not like, not like did you like this better or what, but just like going, maybe move this, or try something different there, or why did you do that? And just like having a formalized kind of relationship where you are expecting to interrogate it and someone else has a degree of ownership and buy-in, I think is really good. And I like being on both sides of that relationship.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about this. This is fascinating. So say I'm a stand-up comedian. Mm-hmm. I've got a show, especially a longer show. I'm going to be doing, the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, something big.
Yeah, so it's going to be like an hour. You're going to be in a room. There's going to be like an audience.
30 nights, the whole thing. And I want a director. Mm-hmm. So I hire this person.
Well, I think this is where it's very because I haven't done it formally for a lot, so I don't know what the usual is.
Okay.
But yeah, you can hire someone to be a director.
Okay.
They'll usually, unlike in theatre where a director will often be, they'll be the first person hired because they'll be part of the casting process for a theatre show.
Right, of course, yeah.
For a comedy show, the director usually comes in a lot later in the piece because the comedian. First of all, the comedian won't be ready until quite late. This is something else that, coming from a theatre background, when I discovered how late, like how close to the festival starting, most of my comedian friends were still working on and finishing their shows, I was horrified. I was like, haven't you been rehearsing it for like 3 weeks by now?
Right.
It wasn't until my last solo show that I had an experience like that. And that was partly because I kind of knew what I wanted that show to be, but I couldn't like break the spine of it, so to speak, and get it working. And I didn't work with a director on that show in the end. I just did it by myself, and it ended up being like a lot of smaller chunks.
Break the spine.
It sounds terrible, but it's I don't know, and I don't know if that's the usual term that people use, but it's more from publishing. It's like when I think it like refers to the book, like you're writing a book.
You get a brand new book.
I might have this idiom all wrong, and I fully own that if I do. But I picked this up from writing circles, and it means like you cracked it, like you've worked it out. Like you've had some big problem that's like been preventing you from getting to where you want to go, and now you've broken that problem.
I see.
And I think they call it the spine because it's like the central thing that runs through the whole story or the comedy show.
Okay.
But yeah, often you'll get a director in fairly late in the process, but what they'll do is they'll start rehearsing with you. And I've worked as a director on a couple of smaller shows, and I've sort of directed more cabaret than straight up stand-up, but it's just a very similar process. You sit down with someone and you watch their show and you make a lot of notes, and then you sort of sit down with them afterwards and go, okay, so this was great. And I'm very careful to always give positive feedback as well. It's very easy to just go through and tell someone all the things you think they should do differently.
Right.
But it's also important to reinforce the things that really work, particularly when they look like they might have been accidental or just a little bit new.
Okay.
Because then you want to say, keep that. That was great. That was amazing.
Okay.
And just give them feedback. And usually when I've done this, I've sort of come in and done it varying amount of times, like anywhere from like once, and that's often when you're an outside eye, which is a term used in theatre circles, and it means something different. You're not a director, but it's just like often you can have an outside eye on a project that does have a director, but you'll just be like, look, we just want to get somebody else in to give us just another opinion before we show it to an audience.
Getting notes.
Yeah, just get some notes from somebody else, right? And comedians do that, even when they're not formally working with a director, So, but it's a pretty simple process, really. Yeah, and like Moosehead shows, like if you win if you're awarded a Moosehead, which is like a grant for new shows in the comedy festival.
Okay.
One of the things they do is set you up with a director.
Oh, I see. That makes sense.
But those shows are meant to be a bit more, not necessarily experimental, but a bit different. They're like something that's a bit non-traditional, pushes the boundaries of what comedy is and where it can go. And so having a director on a project like that, I think, is particularly important.
Oh, neat.
Yeah.
Couple questions.
Yeah.
What are you reading, watching, or listening to? I guess playing, I could add to that.
Sure.
That's really good. It really stands out.
Look, the big one to me is The Good Place. The TV show The Good Place. I discovered long ago, film is not my preferred medium for screen stuff. I'm a big TV guy. I love episodic things. And The Good Place, I love for so many reasons. So many good performances. Very, very funny. Fascinating premise. If you're not familiar with it, woman appears in this weird place. It's like, what am I doing here? They go, oh, you're
she's
dead.
Sort of accidentally in heaven.
Yeah, basically. And she's like, I'm not supposed to be here. They think I'm someone else with the same name. And then her soulmate that she's matched up with is an ethics professor who's like, well, I think the best thing the thing I have to do is to teach you to be good so you can earn your place here. And then it goes from there. And the best thing about it is, unlike your traditional sitcom, where the sit, which is short for situation, never changes. That's the whole purpose of a sitcom, is you have a set premise and then you just...
Cheers.
You just muck with the characters.
Every night at a bar.
Exactly. And which is a great example, because Ted Danson is in The Good Place.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And is wonderful in it. And so the whole cast is wonderful. It's hilarious. It's very clever. They talk about real ethics all the time, like ethical philosophy. It's amazing. And you just don't know what's going to happen. It's such a weird premise, and they've taken it in directions where you're just not sure what's going to happen next. And that's so rare in a sitcom particularly. And it's also just joyful. Like, bad things happen to the main characters, but it's pleasant. It's not nasty. You know,
it's filmed pleasantly too.
It is. It looks wonderful.
It's colorful and crisp and I mean, it's heavenly in that way.
Yeah. So
and a female lead, which is nice.
Oh yeah, and I love Kristen Bell. Like, she's like, I was a big Veronica Mars fan, and she's wonderful. So I'm really enjoying seeing her in a new show.
Funny.
So that's the big one for me. And I'm rereading a lot of Terry Pratchett for my podcast.
Oh, I would suspect so.
Some of which I haven't read for 20 years, and that's a real delight to go back and read that.
I ask that question all the time, and I always think there's like a lot to learn. First of all, I'm always like, oh, I should. You realize how much great content there is out there, and not just good content, because there's tons of good content.
Oh yeah,
but like, what's great?
Yeah.
I also think you learn a little bit about the person. I'm not exactly surprised. I mean, I'm surprised to hear The Good Place per se, but I'm not exactly surprised to hear something that's upbeat, and that you strike me as a happy guy.
Oh, thanks.
You know, like,
I like
and
to.
you have this nice, like, you're one of the things like is like you're a professional. Like, that's clear. Like, I can tell that you had theater training. Like, I think theater folks are very high on the professionality.
Well,
dimension. Is that,
like I said, that's why I like collaboration, but also it teaches you to be collaborative, because theater, like video games actually, or film production or TV production, it must be collaborative. You cannot make theater on your own. Like, you can try, but it won't be very good. Like, a one-person show is not ever really a one-person show in theater.
That's true.
You know, there's even if they wrote and directed themselves, there still has to be somebody else turning on the lights and probably deciding when the lights are turned on and off, because the person who's on the stage, you have to have somebody looking at it.
Yeah, it's hard
can't
to
look at
direct
it
yourself.
So it's very rare that there's a truly one-person show.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think that teaches you to not only appreciate that, but do it well.
Nice. Last question. What is the secret to success? Everybody knows it, but they just can't seem to do it.
I do not know it. I look, you know, you talked before, you asked me, what are you best at? And I said, I don't know. And I do a lot of different things.
You did evade that question.
I did evade that question. I think I'm a really good performer, and oddly enough, I don't do as much of it as I do of other things right now. Yeah, I think I'm a very good comic actor. I think this is why stand-up is sort of a second thing for me. I'm a better comic actor than I am. And I think that's why I find Night Terrace so satisfying, because that's what I'm doing in Night Terrace. Is I'm playing a character, I'm acting, and you know, as much as there are similarities between that character and myself, he's not me, and so it is a performance, and I love that. But I think for me, well, it depends how you measure success. I'm not super famous. I like to describe myself as like a Z-grade local celebrity because there's like, I've done enough work in Melbourne over 20 years that
people know you.
People do know who I am. Like, mostly people in the industry, like a lot of comedians know who I am. But, there's enough people who've seen my work that occasionally people will recognize me or they'll reach out to me on the internet to say, hey, I really like that thing you did. And it doesn't happen very often, but it's very gratifying when it does. That's a certain level of success there. But I think the other thing that's successful is my goal was always really just to be a performer primarily, or whatever artistic thing I was going to do, and have that be my whole job.
Okay.
That's always been my only goal.
Okay.
And it was about 7 years ago that I quit doing a day job.
Okay.
And now I pretty much do that. I mean, I have 5 different jobs, and some of them feel a little bit tangential to the core thing that I want to do, but they still have me standing up in front of people talking to them, even if it's not necessarily in an entertainment.
Yeah, you're performing.
I am performing in one way or another. And so on that level, that's a success. And I think maybe then the secret of success is to really think carefully about what is success to you. And don't, and I think this applies to everything in life, from your career to relationships. You don't want to just buy into whatever the mainstream idea of success is, which for the entertainment industry is you're mega famous and you're making millions of dollars.
Right.
And I'm like, well, that's not what it's really about. What does success actually mean to you? And for me, it means that I make something good that people like, that people listen to. And the third one is the hardest thing.
Okay.
Like that getting an audience is the hardest one. You can get a small audience who likes what you do. Getting an audience that's big enough to sustain you is the difficult part. But I think the big part of success for me is getting to do that as a job professionally.
Nice. A couple of quick comments as I'm thinking about this. Night Terrace.
Yeah.
So I Googled it.
Yeah.
You're the number 1 hit on Google.
Yeah, that's
useful. There's a famous Vincent van Gogh painting called Night Terrace.
Well, actually, that's its nickname. It's called the Cafe Terrace at Night.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but it's taken us a while to rise above mentions of that. And I have a Google alert so that if somebody writes a review of Night Terrace, we hopefully find out. It has never reported to me about our show. It has always reported to me about the Cafe
painting.
Terrace at Night.
Yeah. I just think that was funny because we were talking about French painters earlier, and how that's connected.
Yeah.
That's one small world thing. The second small world thing is your cover photo on Twitter is Sydney Road in Brunswick.
Yeah.
Which is where I'm staying.
Oh, right.
So there's that church in the background.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like almost directly across the street from that church.
There you go, yeah.
This town has gotten really small.
Oh, yeah.
Really quickly.
Well, I lived, because I came here I didn't grow up here, and I moved here for university like 20 years ago. And I have nearly always, with a few years exception, lived in the inner north, like in Carlton or Brunswick. And I've been in Brunswick now for about 14 years. I love it there. Yeah. Which is a whole other thing to talk about because it's changed over that time. But Sydney Road is kind of an icon.
Yes, it is.
And now I live up the north end of Brunswick, near Coburg. So which is a bit different to the end down here. But I love it up there too. Like it's just, it's great.
For listeners who aren't familiar with Melbourne, Sydney Road is the road if you drive to Sydney.
It is technically, yes. If you're going to go to Sydney. It takes you to Sydney. It does take you there, yeah.
That's not the best way to go, though. Flying is the best way.
Well, I have driven. I say I've driven. I don't drive. But I've been in a car that's driven to Sydney from Melbourne many times. And it's a fun trip. I really like the train. I love train travel. And the train from Melbourne to Sydney goes through the Blue Mountains, and it's beautiful.
I hear it's lovely.
Yeah, if you've got an extra day, you can take the overnight train. So if you've got the time to spare and you don't mind paying as much to go more slowly, I recommend it. It's beautiful.
Nice, Ben. Thanks so much for doing this.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guest, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter McGraw next week for another fun, fascinating conversation on I'm Not Joking.